Christina, you were born in Hull, and I think you worked as a medical secretary in Hull before joining the BBC. Is that right?
Yes, I did. I did a 2 year medical secretarial diploma course and gained very good secretarial qualifications, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why I was accepted by the BBC. I read of an advert. There's an advert in the National Daily Mail asking for secretaries to apply to the BBC. So I was rather fed up of where I was, and once you're secretary to a consultant, you can't really go much higher in the health service. My brother was living in London at the time, so I thought it would be quite nice to go and live there. So I applied and I got an interview, and I went along to Portland Place, did my interview, and the very same day she sent me to Television Centre for an interview with a personnel officer in television news. And that went very well, and they actually offered me the job on the spot.
So you went to work for news at Television Centre?
I did, yes. I had my own office on the fifth floor of the Spur, as it was then, and I overlooked the Horseshoe car park. And for those people that know Television Centre will know that. And found myself behind Angela Rippon queuing at the tea bar.
How exciting! And then what did you have to do? What was your job there?
Normal secretarial duties really. Had a manual typewriter, carbon copies, lots of filing, lots of admin. Plus sending off forms to the infamous secretive formalities office in Broadcasting House.
Oh.
And I remember the personnel officer, she was called Liz, telling me if the formalities form came back, rejected so to speak, there was nothing we could do about it. So I didn't really know what was going on, obviously.
So these formality forms were about dodgy items in the news that someone might object to?
No, they were about people. They were about people.
Oh, they were about people.
Yeah, it was about people. They investigated people that were applying for jobs in the news department. It was all about basically spies and things.
Yeah.
Which subsequently has come out. People with left-wing communist, people that belong to the Communist Party, that type of thing. But I also had to sign personally had to sign the Official Secrets Act.
Good Lord.
I know. But yeah, I did. I remember it very clearly, thinking, oh my goodness.
Good
I
heavens above. So
understand.
you must have been vetted pretty carefully yourself.
Well, I was thinking about that today, actually. I guess they must have vetted me, indeed. I can't remember if we sent everybody who applied for a job to formalities, but I definitely remember it. And then there's apparently this infamous Christmas tree symbol on the staff file, but I can't remember that.
Right.
Because
you never saw it
I think if they were rejected, they couldn't be employed.
No. So that was about security, but what about your links with production there in news?
Well, I did. I helped somebody on a news production course. I helped somebody, and I got a bit of an insight into it, and then I got an attachment as a news transmission assistant, which basically is the person that sits beside the director, and basically makes sure that you come out on time.
So you were immersed right in the centre of
I was
broadcasting.
very much. Yes, I was very much immersed in it. Yes, and I think if you went into the newsroom as it was in 1977-8, people would be pretty shocked actually, because it was incredibly noisy and
and very white male, presumably.
Yes, very white male. Full. Everybody seemed to smoke. In fact, you could, in those days, order ashtrays, BBC ashtrays, from stationery. It was manual typewriters, so there was a large
clattering
room.
away. Yep, so it was very noisy.
Clattering away, producing these scripts, which, as a news transmission assistant, there was a print room, and the ladies there would put the stencils on these bander machines and literally manually roll them out. So I had to collect all those and make sure that they're in the right running order. So,
This was the age before. Well, no, you had there were teleprompters.
no, there were teleprompters. Yeah, yeah. I can't remember. I didn't really go in the studio that much. I didn't have much time actually. There was always a floor manager in the studio.
But it was sort of the era of Richard Baker and people
It
like
was in
that.
the era of Richard Baker, yes, and Kenneth.
Kenneth Kendall.
Thank you. Yes, and Angela Rippon obviously was the newest and latest arrival. Yes, it was all very exciting and nerve making and stressful,
Yes.
and the old thing about writing on the back of cigarette packets was actually true. They used to run into the gallery with the outwords on the telecine of the film, literally written on the back of a cigarette packet.
How hilarious. Now, you'd come
Yeah.
from the NHS where the bureaucracy was of a certain kind.
Yeah.
How did you find the BBC then?
Well, one of the most surprising things, I think, was that it wasn't very formal, because where I came from, I was working with a consultant, well, two consultants actually, and I always called them, well, they because they were surgeons, you would call them Mr. I always called them Mr. Winchester and Mr. Randall. And then when I came to the BBC, everybody called each other by their first names.
Yep.
Which was quite shocking and took some getting used to.
Yes. Now, I remember in 1969 getting a letter from the executive producer I was going to work with saying it's all Christian names at the BBC, and indeed it was. You're quite right.
Yeah.
But how about the culture generally? I mean, how were you treated as a woman, for example? We were in a very large minority there.
There were lots of women there, but not very many women in higher positions, basically. One of the ways that you could was through production, through being an NTA as they called them, then possibly rising to being a news director. And also I was living in, the BBC had a hostel in those days called the Beaumont House, which is in Prince's Square. Beautiful house. It was just off Queensway. So I was there with lots of other young people from all over the country.
Yeah.
They all had different jobs. So one of the girls that I knew, she actually worked on Parkinson. So she was a secretary. So I got to go and see the Parkinson show. So and also in those days you could go, if it was a studio audience, you could go around the studios basically. So as I got to know more about possibilities of working at the BBC, I became more ambitious, I suppose.
I suppose the ambition was effectively to get into production, presumably as a PA.
Yeah, that was my ambition, was to get a spot on what they called the production panel, which was of production assistants who basically... it was a step up from being a secretary. And
So you could be sent anywhere if you were on the panel, is that right?
yes, you could. So it was very difficult to get onto it, and I remember very distinctly Liz saying, "Oh well, because I'd only been at the BBC. You could only apply for a job after you'd been there for a year." So I did. After a year, I applied, and she said, "Oh, I don't know. I don't think I don't want you to be disappointed, but not many people get on it first time." Anyway, so I did my best and trailed people on the Parkinson programme.
Yes.
And anyway, basically, I got it first time, so I was very, very, very pleased. And I don't think Liz could quite believe it, but there we are. So getting onto the panel was quite prestigious, and they only took so many people a year because and lots of people applied. girls. They were all girls in those days. It wasn't anything to do with gender, but in those days, girls were the secretaries.
Yes,
There wasn't any.
yes.
That was the way it was. And
Yes, it was a long time until we had male PAs, but we did
indeed.
eventually.
I mean, there was absolutely no reason apart from having to have secretarial skills, I guess. But even those as a production assistant, as a PA, you didn't really need them. There was no other reason for boys not to apply, but it just didn't happen. So as I said, they only took so many people a year. So we didn't go and watch real productions in the gallery, but we went on a 4-week beginners course. I believe it was 4 weeks. Woodstock Grove, which was a training building, did have its own studio, so we would go and do a little programme, and we would be act as cameramen and vision mixers, and obviously do our role as production assistant there. So we would all take turns and swap around, and we went out with a cameraman. We made a little film, and we cut it. We edited it on a Steenbeck. It was real film in those days. So it gave us a flavour of the types of situations we would be coming across when we were actually working in production.
So when you finished your training, what did you do then?
I got sent to a light entertainment programme, a sitcom actually, called Terry and June. So I think I joined them after they'd done the location filming, so it was the studio side of things. And so I was a trainee then, and I trailed the PA on that. So that was great fun, and I was remembering how, because they recorded it in front of a studio audience, and I think on the last programme they let me do the shot calling next to the director, and I had to run in a piece of film. It was quite nerve-wracking because you had to time it correctly, so because they normally ran the film, on the back of a laugh basically. So you had to be careful not to run it too soon, because then you'd cut the laugh off.
Right. Run it from a 10 on the gate.
Yeah. Oh yes, from a 10. Yeah. But obviously it wasn't in seconds,
And
so
then,
it was harder.
Sure, and then you presumably had to do all the post-production paperwork. Did you? Were you doing that kind of thing as well?
Yeah. When I was fully qualified, we had to do all the paperwork, which was quite a lot. Not so much when I was training, but yes, when I went out into the real world, I did.
So the real world, as it were, would be probably when you were made a PA for a particular programme, and probably the only PA maybe on that programme, or just one of a couple.
I was thinking about the staffing on programmes actually. In fact, one of the first programmes that I was sent to when I was a trained PA was actually on Albert's, our chairman's, series called Think Again, and it was actually in our office, was near Broadcasting House. And Children's had a couple of outposts. It had Jeremy Swan, who was Mr. Rent-A-Ghost next door, and it had Albert's office, from which they did Think of a Number, and Think Again was a new series that they were doing. And but I was thinking about the staffing of things, and when I started, and there were very few people really that worked on the production. It was myself, Albert, production manager was called Mike Seddon, and we had an AFM, because assistant floor manager, because when we went filming we did some setups that needed an AFM to do that.
Yeah.
And that was it basically.
Yes, that's right, because it's pre-producer choice.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, well, it definitely was. And I mean, I look at the credits these days and on programmes, and I think, good grief, there are so many people.
So do I.
And sometimes I think, well, is the cleaner going to get a credit?
Yes, quite.
There weren't many people and that was a 6-part series. If things were later, I worked on things that had bigger production teams, but there was no superfluous staffing, if you see what I mean. Everybody worked really hard.
Yes, the mechanics of studio productions were really it was a very disciplined environment, extraordinarily disciplined. I mean, if you remember that there was an overnight strike, so a set and light for a program
Yeah.
would be recorded
Yeah.
in one day in a couple of hours. Then, you went
Yeah.
home and within minutes the place was being cleared. The next
Yeah,
program was moved in.
I mean,
It was incredibly oppressive.
Television Centre was run very efficiently, and it was also at that time heavily unionised. Of course, I remember the panic because we had to finish in the studio at 10 o'clock
Yes.
at night, and I remember the mounting panic if we thought we weren't going to
Yes,
finish
you
in
got
time.
yes,
and,
if you overran, and you then got colour bars on all monitors, and everyone went home.
well, you'd have to, if you thought you weren't going to make it, you have to send somebody, the producer, down to try and persuade the crew to just give us 5 more minutes. But we would also obviously be charged overtime,
Yes.
which we couldn't afford. So there was always that freeze-on of, are we going to make it? Are we going to finish by 10 o'clock?
Yes, I remember it well.
Yeah.
So, major productions you went on. You worked with Albert, and then you went to music and arts, I think.
Well, I did a few. I went to Docs and I went to continuing education actually, and I worked in entertainment, light entertainment, and I was fortunate enough to work on Top of the Pops, and that involved bar counting, which for the
Arnie must explain that because that's very important. Great skill. Tell us about bar counting.
Bar counting. Basically, there are normally 4 beats to every bar. And on a camera script, on a song, the director makes the cut line on the script is where he wants the vision mixer to change the camera. Now, the only way really that the camera people can really know when that's going to happen is by the production assistant counting the bars. So the opening shot might be camera 1, it might be on for 4 bars. The next shot 2, might be on camera 3, it'll be for 3 bars. So as the song is progressing, the production assistant basically has to count shot 1 to next. Then in between that they had to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3 of, and so and at the shop you go 3 of 4 bars. So they know at the end of 4 bars the shot's going to change and it'll be off then.
The cameramen had cards with...
They had camera cards,
the,
yes.
Yes, with the shots marked on.
Yeah, only their shots.
Yes, and each shot would probably involve a camera move, which had to finish within a certain number of beats.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
so it's quite a skilled business. Yeah.
Yeah, they had to focus, and it might be a pull focus, all that type of thing. So they had to know how long they had. I really enjoy. I always used to love doing it. I really enjoyed it. It was a skill. I didn't have any musical training, but I obviously had rhythm, and didn't find it that difficult actually. Although obviously a lot of people do, but I actually really, really enjoyed it. So that was great. And then as a result of that, Music and Arts were doing Russell Harty live twice a week, I think at that time, in Manchester and in London. And they wanted somebody, they wanted a PA. So I had long wanted to work in Music and Arts. It was my ambition because I'm very much an arts person. And so obviously I jumped at the chance. So that involved working, I think it was at least a couple of years with Russell. And so I was back doing live programmes, which I love as well, and doing the music, going filming. So I had a fantastic time doing that. Lots of incidents with Russell and very good fun.
But you didn't get to sort of be a PA, for example, on the proms, where I imagine bar counting would be very different.
No, I didn't, because I wasn't classically trained.
No.
So I wouldn't, I mean, to work as a PA on the proms, you needed to be able to read a score. The same way that the vision mixers have to be able to read a score. I have a very good friend of mine who is very good at that.
Yes, and always cutting on the upbeat.
Yeah, and she's classically musically trained, so
Yeah.
she can read a score very easily, and that again is a skill, a massive skill,
Now, what
definitely.
about the move to Bristol? Because that was really into really big production.
Yes, it was. I mean, I left the BBC and went freelance, and then I came back and worked as a unit manager on the Late Show for a year, which was very stressful, and a live arts programme every evening, well, 4 nights a week after Newsnight. So I was burnt out by the end of the year.
Yes.
And decided for lots of reasons to move to apply for a job in Bristol in the Natural History Unit. I had a very good friend who worked there, and I'd visited Bristol a number of times, and I liked it. So it was very appealing, and I'd sort of got fed up of London and all the rest of it. I'd lived there for 16 years, and I wanted to buy a house, and I knew that it would be really difficult in London on my own,
Yes.
even in those days. And so the prospect of moving to Bristol, where I knew I could afford, economically it would be more beneficial, and for lots of other reasons. So yes, I moved to the Natural History Unit in, when was it, 1991, I think it was. And it was all change.
Very different sort of production. Tell us about natural
Yeah,
history
very,
production.
very different. Well,
Yeah.
I'd gone from a live nightly arts programme to programmes that take at least 2 years to make. So the sort of timescale involved was difficult to get your head around. The way of making their programmes, again, is completely different. They get the footage, they film the footage, but they don't record any sound, or they might record some wild sound, but they might send a sound recordist out with them, but that was quite rare. All the sound is, well, apart from the wild track that they get in the field for Atmos and things like that, a lot of the sound, majority of the sound is made in the dubbing theatre. So that it's a completely different way of making programmes. So
That would surprise a lot of people, I think. And they would, watch a natural history program and assume that if you saw, an animal roar, that was it. It had roared and you recorded it. But you're saying it's
not
all done post-production.
well, they might record a lion roaring, a sound record of a lion roaring in the field, but it won't necessarily be the one that you're looking at on the screen, because one lion's roar is much the same as the next in terms
Except
of...
to another lion. Yes.
Except to another lion, obviously. And obviously there are types of behavioural sounds that are recognisable to a human, basically.
But
It's
the
a bit
cameramen
bigger.
that were working with Natural History Unit are very
Yeah.
specialist and presumably were all worldwide a bunch.
Yes, they were. I mean, we had because producers, directors had certain cameramen that they liked to work with, because it was such a specialist field. Because most of the time you're sending a cameraman out on his own to try and capture that behaviour. I think these days they tend to not send them on their own. But in those days you would be sending out a cameraman because the production couldn't afford to send a producer with them the majority of the time. There would be somebody to help them at the other end, a fixer or that type of person. So you had to really trust your cameraman to, do his job, basically. So we used to send quite a lot of cameramen who were English, basically. But then you also, if you were going abroad, and you, as a producer, director, there were wildlife cameramen all over the world. If some cameraman in some country was a particular specialist in filming that particular animal, for example, which some of them were, you would hire that person. It's sort of horses for courses, really.
Yes. But I mean, you were effectively working to a kind of script. I mean, you wanted to get footage which showed certain things, and presumably you had academics advising you
Yeah,
on.
we had research. Yeah, I mean, the cameraman would probably team up with a fixer, but also team up with a researcher that was studying the animal in the field, so that the researcher would be able to tell the cameraman, this is what I've observed, this is the best time to go out to find this animal. I'll take you to where where they are, all of that sort of stuff. So they're working very much with academics in the field.
Did you get abroad much yourself?
Yeah, I did. Well, it's all relative. I did go to Africa a few times, actually. I went to Kenya a couple of times, went to Botswana quite a few times, at least 3 times. Went to South Africa. So, yeah, a lot of... And then I used to go...
That's with productions. I mean, you didn't just go there. You were part of your job.
Yeah, because I was, at that time, when I went to the Natural History Unit, I was a unit manager.
Yes. Now, tell us about the role of the unit manager, because post producer choice, unit managers became absolutely key, didn't they? Because, they had to deal with all aspects of production, and everything was cash as opposed to cash and resources.
Yes, it was, yes. When I first started working at the NHU, I was unit manager for a series called The Natural World, which at that time had 20 programmes a year. And the thing that I found interesting, difficult, was that they worked on a 3-year cycle, because if programmes took 2 years to make, you had to commission them at least 2 years ahead, if not longer. And that meant, as a unit manager, I was in charge of the money, the budgeting, third-party co-production money. The role of a unit manager meant that I had to do all the negotiation with the post-production houses. And most people then, when after John Burt, the craft people, if you like, started to become freelance. The wildlife cameramen were always freelance. We didn't have any staff wildlife cameramen, but film editors and dubbing editors. There was a genuine choice, and we had to negotiate that.
So, as a unit manager, it was an extremely responsible job, and you were dealing with a lot of money.
I certainly was. Certainly with Natural History Unit productions, they, the ones that I was involved with, they were costing quarter of £1,000,000 starting from, and we had to get. The BBC could not afford to fund them themselves. We had to get money from the commercial arm of the BBC Worldwide as it became, who invested money in our programmes in order for them to get certain rights to sell the programmes abroad.
Yes.
But we also had to work and find principally co-production deals with people in America, with television companies in America. We did a lot with Discovery Channel. Not all of them were done with them, but a lot were done with them. So it was normally 3-part funding. It was the BBC, it was Worldwide, and it was a third party, normally some American television company. We also did a lot with WNET, which is a PBS station in New York.
Who was responsible for, as it were, the production, the design of the series? Was it always the BBC, or was this a shared thing?
No, it was basically the BBC going out to the market and saying, "We're making this programme. Would you like to invest in it?" They used to go. I used to go to Cannes, to the MIP Festival, which is a television festival, which is where all the where Worldwide have a stand and they sell the programmes to all around the world, but also third-party co-production producers go as well. So you could have meetings with, as I said, Discovery and WNET, PBS in America, and there was another ABC Productions, and they were based in Los Angeles. So you would go and have meetings with them and say, this is what we've commissioned. Would you like to invest in it? And
Yeah.
I think there was one. I think we only did one what I would call a reverse co-production, which was with this company in Los Angeles, where they came to us and said, we are making this program, would you like to put some money into it?
Yeah.
For television rights. It didn't happen very often.
Editorially, it was nearly always the BBC, but occasionally.
Yeah, but you may have ended up doing some versions for say you might end up doing an American version of it, or they had the right to version it because for time, for example, obviously they have to version it for time for them. But yes, pretty much it was the BBC because there weren't many companies at that time originating natural history programs.
No.
You know, there was on ITV, there was Anglia Survival. Around the world, there was a unit in New Zealand that we used to deal with. There was wildlife production in Australia, again with ABC Australia and TVNZ in New Zealand, but there weren't that many.
Because the value of the archive in Natural History Unit is enormous.
Yeah.
Did you have to deal with archiving, with searching for archive footage and so on?
No, we had a library there actually, an NHU library, and we also had one of their jobs was to sort out the sound. There was an NHU sound library.
Yes.
Because as I said, the need for sound from the field was in high demand, and they would commission sound recorders sometimes to go out into the field and get particular sounds that they felt they were missing in the library.
Right. No, that's one of the things I think most people would be most surprised about, that the sound is not necessarily the sound of the thing you're seeing.
Well, it wasn't in sync. The sound, the wildlife cameraman didn't record in sync. They didn't have. They might have a little sound recorder with them. I feel as though I'm spilling the secrets.
No.
Also, sometimes they have to have flexibility in the edit, is what I'll say.
Yeah.
With the moving footage. So if you had to sync it all the time, you wouldn't be able to do the edit. No,
quite. So you were in Bristol for quite a number of years, were you?
Yeah, I was there for 12 years after, I think... Yeah. I did the natural world for a long time, and part of being a unit manager was managing staff, which is probably one of the hardest jobs as a manager.
Very extremely responsible job. Very interesting, actually. So what made you leave?
Oh, crikey.
Or do you want to keep quiet about that? I mean, you enjoyed working at the BBC, you really did, presumably.
I wanted to say that, one of the reasons I left was because I was a unit manager, then I became a production executive, which sounds very highfalutin.
It does.
But actually it just takes you much more further away from production, which is where my interests lie, really. And it becomes forms and admin and spreadsheets and all of that. And I'd done it for a long time, and I wanted to change. And I actually came back to Hull and worked on a project that BBC Education, BBC Learning was running, which was all about digital media. So, which was very, very interesting. It was a trial project. It was quite trailblazing at the time. It was providing teachers in schools, secondary and primary, with basically video footage that they could put on these new smart boards and stream.
Yes.
to the pupils. And one of the reasons Hull was chosen is because it has its own telephone company. It's independent of British Telecom.
Fascinating.
Yeah, we don't have anything to do with British Telecom. And so that was really interesting. So that worked out really well. But I mean, I honestly, the BBC gave me the best career that I could ever have possibly had, and I got to travel. I got to meet people that I would never have met. You know, it was a fantastic career.
But I gather you've also got this great interest in getting an academic qualification, which I think you've done recently, isn't that right?
Well, yeah, not really that recently now. But one of the reasons I came back was to do a degree, because I hadn't done one
Right.
when normal people do them, because I'd left school and I was in grammar school. I was in the top stream, but unfortunately various things happened, and I left school at 16. So I've always wanted to fulfil my academic.
Yeah. So what did you do? What did you study?
I did a BA Honours in Arts and Humanities.
Ah, your arts interest again. Yeah.
Yeah, which was 6 years, part-time I did it. So I worked, all but for the last year, I worked all through. The last year I took off. Well, I stopped working really the last year. Well, I did stop working. I never really went back. So I could concentrate on my dissertation.
Yes.
And then I did a year's history of art course at the university as well. So
Very fulfilling. Yeah. Absolutely.
yeah, no.
Well, I
absolutely,
think that's a very interesting career, Christina. Is there anything you want to say about the culture of the BBC?
Yeah, I did want to say something about the culture, because I think in those times when you worked on a production, we became a family, because you work on something for 2-3 months longer. You work really hard. You work long hours when you're filming. You're away from home. You rely on people. And living in London, you know, people don't realise probably now, but there was a bar in every BBC building practically, and
Yes.
television centre there was, and it was.
And some of the best ideas came from the bar during lunch hours.
Exactly, and it was subsidised. There was a thing called the BBC Club, which was subsidised by the BBC, and you paid, I don't know, very little a month to belong to it. And they had bars certainly in London, and I think in regional places, certainly in Bristol, they had a very big bar there. And the club, apart from running bars and cheap alcohol, which it was, because it was subsidised, they had lots of social groups that people basically joined, sailing and I don't know, lots and lots. I mean, I didn't join any, but there were lots and lots, and there's so there was a sort of collective feeling of the BBC.
Yes,
and
there was a collective
belonging.
Culture. Yes,
there was a collective culture, and people used to go to the bar after work, because living in London, you couldn't go home and then go out again. So people tended to go into the bar. People went to the bar at lunchtime. It was part of the culture, but it wasn't. You know, there were never any black holes. You know, people got their work done.
The common culture was crucially important, I think, and maybe it's lost a lot of that.
Yes, I think it has really. You know, just the things like, you know, just the fact that the BBC seemed to me to look after its staff in those days.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the 80s.
Yes.
And into the 90s. You know, there was, you know, when I worked in news, there was this quite apt, and what you know, what's happened last week is there was late night transport. You know, they paid for a taxi to take you home.
Yes.
They did. There was there was occupational health, a huge occupational health department.
Yeah. So you felt safe. You felt well looked after.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, and those things, ridiculous things like wet weather allowance. You know, when you were filming, they would pay for your barber or whatever, you know, so you didn't get wet. Those type of things, which all added into that feeling of being looked after.
Yep.
I'm
And you
not
miss
just saying
that, do you?
BBC.
You miss that. You miss that to some extent.
Well, I just think that I'm not sure it exists anymore. Well, the contrast was when I went freelance and there was nobody looking after me at all. You definitely
Yes.
appreciate the BBC when you go, and that
Yeah.
it is quite a cold world out there. And,
It is, but it's also very different in the BBC now. You know,
Yes.
everything's casualised. There's so much independent production and so on, and it's
I
difficult
know.
to know
I
how
mean,
you keep the corporate culture going.
I think I had the best years, basically.
Yeah, yeah. I know, and I tend to feel the same. All right. Well, I think that's a very interesting, useful piece, Christina. I think a lot of people ought to know about the roles of PAs and unit managers and all the people who actually keep the wheels running. And you've obviously had quite a hand in that. And so I'd like to thank you very much for talking to me.
You're very welcome.